Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at Irish Breakdown. You know that dude. That's Ryan Roberts, and we are back for round two of today's episodes of Irish Breakdown podcast, and we are going to talk recruiting. Notre Dame just picked up a commitment from offensive lineman Joe Otting. Ryan, this has been a very interesting recruitment, and it is a lot like Sam Pendleton's. It happened very quickly. uh Big pickup. Now let's be honest, the first thing that people are going to talk about, it's not a sexy pickup, 3-star kid, all those type of things, but this is a kid that Notre Dame, Iowa wanted bad, and there aren't many teams around the country that produce offensive linemen the way that Notre Dame and Iowa do. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it came down, just for everyone to know, it came down between Notre Dame, Iowa, and Kansas State as kind of the final school that was in that top group. Like you said, Brian, this one we had learned from Coach Arnold, who is the head coach there at Hayden, that they first contacted Coach Arnold and Joe around November of last year, around Thanksgiving, kept tabs on him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then Coach Heastand was there pretty recently when they offered him to just try to size him up a little bit, to make sure he checks out from a size perspective, from a growth potential perspective, all those check marks kind of. And then recently he gets the offer, and then he comes back this past weekend for camp. And again, I think the coaching staff takes the opportunity to take a look at Joe, project him a little bit, and make sure that they're comfortable with the type of player he is, because the film's outstanding. There's no question about that. It's about the growth potential, what his body type is, all that good stuff. He checks the box again. Here we are, Joe Otting, part of the class officially.
So what we were going to do is we were going to explain to you all why Joe Otting was going to commit to Notre Dame and what he might like about Notre Dame. But we figured, might be a better idea is just let Joe explain why he committed to Notre Dame. So with that in mind, we have Joe Otting on the show, everybody. Joe, thank you so much for joining us, buddy. Congratulations.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah, of course. So, this has been a whirlwind for you. You got your offer barely over a month ago.
Yep.
And now here you are, June 7th, Notre Dame is the school. What was it about Notre Dame? What was it about this last month or so that made you say, hey, this is the move for me?
Growing up as a kid, growing up in a Catholic community, I go to Catholic high school right now. Notre Dame's kind of always been a dream school of mine. We wear the blue and gold as well at the high school. And so just coming on, just growing up and wanting to play for the Fighting Irish is always something I've wanted to do. And finally getting that opportunity is just something crazy to me. And it's been great. That's why I committed.
You're a redhead, right? So, the red's going to show. But, you and I talked about 10 minutes ago, and you were still red. You're glowing. You're clearly excited, man. What was it like the minute that you just decided that, you know what, this I'm going to do, and then, talk to the staff and let them know, okay, we're doing this?
It was a big relief off my shoulder. This recruiting process is very stressful. Very blessed to be in it, of course. But just finally having that commitment is just big relief, and I'm pumped about it.
Joe, let me ask you this.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Because I know that Coach Heastand, from talking to you a little bit in the past, was a big element to this recruitment, right? And obviously when he came to the visit and just kind of was able to meet you in person for the first time, I think things really started to heat up then, obviously right after you got the offer. Take us through your relationship with Coach Heastand and how instrumental he's been throughout this process for you.
Yeah, he's been great. We stay in touch periodically throughout the week. Have a phone call about every week, and it's always good talking to him, just the knowledge for the game he has and his history of just developing linemen and the history of offensive line units he's had. It's just something to be said for, and that's why I really love him and I'm excited to play for him, no doubt.
Yeah, and I know
I love this is Ryan, real quick. I'm sorry. This is my favorite response so far. This has kind of been, speaking of Coach Heastand, this is the deal. If Harry likes you, I love you. So I think getting that seal approval from Coach Heastand was a big part of that. Ryan, go ahead with your next question with your follow-up.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Joe, obviously you got to see Coach Heastand in action this past weekend, obviously, see him coach a little bit, see some of his star pupils of the past, right? Which I know is obviously a big thing for coming to Notre Dame. Talk to me about seeing him in person, coaching live, seeing some of the greats that have come through Notre Dame. How big of an impact was this past weekend for you from that regard?
Yeah, it was big. Being taught by Zach Martin was huge. It was great being coached up by him. and just seeing how instructive they all are and the technique and everything. It was great. I learned a lot, and I'm very glad I went.
So what were some of the things when you talk about kind of working with Coach Easton and working with Zach Martin? What were some things that you kind of say, okay, I'm watching these guys, I'm working with these guys, these are some of the best to do it. What were some things you were able to pick up that you say, okay, look, when I go home and I get ready for fall camp and I go to my senior season, these are things I'm going to try to take and apply to my game as I continue to develop as a player?
Yeah, so the Notre Dame camp they taught what Notre Dame does, and not a lot of camps do that. And so learning just the inside zone technique and run blocking, and also just the pass sets, it was good learning them single-handedly from Zach Martin and Coach Easton. And so I'm definitely going to use that this summer to develop and turn it into my bag I have as a player.
Now, Joe, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this question, or if there was a moment, but as you kind of go through this process, you met Coach Easton in the school, you go through the last month, you get the offer and the camp and all that. Was there a moment where you just kind of knew, like, okay, this is what I'm doing, or did it kind of slowly build to that? What was that moment like when you just knew, like, okay, this is the move?
It kind of slowly built up. Notre Dame was always the dream offer in my process, and so when Coach Reese kind of came through, that was awesome. And then once Coach Easton came to school, and just talking to him, and just, as I said before, his knowledge of the game and just what he brings to the table was just something to be said for. And so, yeah, that's when I'd say I'd know.
Joe, I got the ability to sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, go for it, man.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Joe, so I talked to Coach Arnold this morning. I know that your family is probably very excited. I know he's excited. I know the whole Hayden community there at the high school is excited. Can you talk just a little bit about the excitement from not you, but from the supporting, from your support system that's around you?
Yeah, it's something to be said for, everyone is very excited for me. Just the Catholic community, everyone loves Notre Dame down here. So it's very awesome to see, and it's a blessing that everyone's happy for me. It's awesome.
Last question, Joe. I just wanted to ask you this. One of the things we were told is that you had made your decision, but you didn't want to say anything publicly until you had a chance to kind of talk to all the other schools that were looking at you, which I found quite admirable. But what is the challenge as a recruit, not specifically other coaches? Because I think a lot of people think like there's just this one school and that's the only school I like. And they don't realize, like, there's a lot of schools that you connect with. What was, kind of when you look at that, what's this experience been like for you as you've gotten to know, the Ferentzes and that O-line tradition and Coach Kleiman and his staff at Kansas State? There's some really good programs you've been able to get into. What's this experience overall kind of been like for you as you've been able to connect with some? I mean, there's some really good offensive line minds that you've had a chance to get to know through this recruiting process.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been a blessing. It's very stressful, but it's cool just going around, seeing all the places. You meet a lot of good people through this process. So saying no to a lot of these schools was pretty tough, but, talking with Coach Barnett was awesome. His mentors, Coach Easton, and just the whole Iowa staff it's great, no doubt. And then kind of K-State, it was the same thing. They've been with me from the start, and I appreciate everything they've done, no doubt. But it's been a very exciting process, and I'm very blessed to be a part of it, no doubt.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Any last words you'd like to leave Notre Dame Nation? They're all over here fired up, talking about you and all that. Anything you'd like to leave Notre Dame Nation here before you head out of here and get to celebrating your big day?
Yeah, telling Notre Dame Nation I'm bringing athleticism, a strong work ethic, toughness and competitive mentality, and a player that's ready to roll. Let's go.
And what he's not going to tell you is the kid can flat out hoop. Got that from his mom. Dropped 15.5 points per game last year. Did not know. Your mom actually let me know she was a college basketball player. So, definitely comes in the genes. So if Notre Dame students, if you're looking for someone to pick up your intramural basketball team, this is a guy you're going to want to get. 6'4", but he can also knock down threes, and he can post you up. He can do all of it. So had to make you smile, Joe. Thanks so much for being on with us, buddy.
Yes, sir. No problem. I appreciate all having me.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care. So that was Joe Otting, everybody. Notre Dame's newest commitment, Ryan. I loved the fact, so he committed several days ago. but he did not want to go public until he had a chance to personally call all the coaches that recruited him and let them know he'd made his decision, which I think says a lot about this young man. But so let's kind of dive a little bit into we were talking beforehand about a little bit about the backstory for Joe Otting and just kind of how we got here. And there's two steps to an offensive lineman having a chance to come to Notre Dame. Number one is obviously you've got to be a guy that Harry Hiestand wants, right? And rankings aside and all that, that's the big key. And once Harry Hiestand kind of signs off, I mean, it's okay, yeah, the kid can play. But there's a second really important factor in this that I think also we have to discuss and talk about, because it's equally as important, and that is Matt Balis. Yep. And that's what part of last week was about. Coach Hiestand and the staff wanted to, Coach Reese, Coach Hiestand, they all wanted to see Joe up close. Let's see how he works. Let's see how he takes to coaching. Let's see, can I instruct him on something he can easily, because like what he said, they teach what Notre Dame does. So you get the kid in camp, hey, we're going to teach him some things that he doesn't do on film. How quickly does he adapt to it? Can he pick up the zone stuff quickly? Can he take something we teach him? And we talked about this in the show yesterday, Ryan. Can he take it and apply it quickly and all that stuff, check the boxes? But the final piece was Matt Balis has to look at this kid and say, okay, he has a frame that I can work with. It's very similar to Ashton Craig last year. They're very similar in a lot of ways. Doesn't have the natural girth maybe, but once Matt Balis kind of signed off, I think that was the final step needed to say, this is a kid that we're going to do that. And then once he did, then his spot in the class, because coming into last week, it wasn't a given he was going to have a spot for him. They liked him, but they really wanted to see him in camp. They really wanted Coach Balis to kind of sign off on it. And once that all checked out, it was a no-brainer. There was never a question after that whether they would or would not make room for him in this class. And we'll explain that here in a little bit, but just kind of want to talk about that part too. It was really important to get him on campus and see what he could do.
Yeah, I know it sounds weird to size a high school recruit up, right? But it's important. That's the body typing. That's projecting how big a player can hold, how much weight a player can hold. We've talked a lot about like Nicholas Petit-Frere coming to Ohio State. It's just like
Emil
Wagner. Like what do these frames hold? What can they hold comfortably? And it's really a great point, Brian, because actually, again, I talked to Coach Arnold, his high school head coach, this morning, and he told me that when he was talking to Joe about through the recruiting process, the two people that you need to get to know, the position coach and the strength and conditioning coach. He understands that there's development that Joe needs to take place in the future from a physical perspective. And he also knows that the ability to see him in person was paramount for this one, right? Like they loved the film. And we're probably going to show you the film at some point here. Right. It's great film, man. Quickly, there's no question at all that the film is fantastic. The question is, can the body type hold up the athleticism on film? Because that's probably the most attractive thing for me on film, is that this kid is a really gifted athlete.
Right. I don't think anyone that's watched this film questions that. I mean, the athleticism's there. The punch is there, which we'll show when we get to film. It's really about, look, there are some kids that I've seen that I've recruited to the Division III level that you're like, this kid's got great film. This kid's a great player. Like, this kid's a great offensive lineman in high school. But he's 6'1", 235 pounds. Just he's never going to be able to play at that level just from a size standpoint alone. And so that's a big key. Is like, and that's where Matt Balis has to be valued as someone like, oh, look, we got to sign off on this, right? And if you listen to Harry Hiestand talk when he was hired, and you've listened to him talk about Matt Balis, you can see that there's a respect there that he has, just like everybody else in the program has. With, let me make sure that Coach Balis is on board with this as well. And once all those things kind of checked off, it was a no-brainer. I mean, like you said, the staff liked this kid a lot. I think once Coach Hiestand got the film on him, just like Sam Pendleton, once he saw the film on him, he's like, yeah, I got to have this kid. Now, let's talk specifically about why Joe Otting is also an important player in this class, because Notre Dame had two main objectives coming into this class on offensive line. One we've talked a ton about, Ryan, and that's offensive tackle. That's a huge one. This is not meeting that need, right? Joe is not even a tackle in high school. He's a guard in high school, as we'll show you on the film. The other one was you needed to rebuild the center depth chart. Look, when the 2023 class shows up, Jarrett Patterson's gone. If Jarrett Patterson moves to guard, your centers after that are Zeke Carell, who's going to be a fifth-year senior when this class shows up, and Michael Carmody, who's going to be a senior when this class shows up. Now, he'll have extra years of eligibility and all that because of, COVID and redshirting and all that. But these kids are getting up in years. And then you look at the younger classes. Pat Coogan is just not your typical like high level guy. He's just a nice, tough kid, but he's not, he's a guy that you need to try to recruit over. And then after that, you have maybe Ashton Craig, who could play center, but also could play guard, could play some tackle. He's got some versatility, but he's a guy that could potentially be a center. There's some talk about Joey Tanona possibly being a center, but that's a big question mark now about, his future and those type of things. So they really needed to get someone who could be a center. The way they were looking at it early on was Sareveld and Pendleton were two possibilities as center. They never felt super comfortable with either of them being great fits at center. Pendleton's more of a big, strong kid. You want to have him as a mover at guard. Sareveld, the question was the question that Coach Easton had. They loved his size and his toughness, but the big question they had was, can he move well enough to play center? And so once they kind of got involved with Joe Otting, it was like no brainer. That's the potential center, assuming that he checks all the other boxes. And that's what they see because, he's got the quickness, he's got the athleticism, he's got the punch. Once they checked off the body type, it made sense. So this is a kid that is being recruited at center from everything that we've been told. And that was a need coming into this class. And I think of the kids they've looked at, he's the most natural transition athletically and size and body type and all that to that center position.
Well, I think it was like one of the first times we watched it, Brian. We watched separately, and I think one of us texted the other and was just like, this kid's a center. Like, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah,
right?
and because remember when he got offered, it was like, what? I mean, why are they offering this kid? Like, because look, Ryan, the natural reaction is, even for us who don't care about stars, the natural reaction is like, okay, this kid's a 3-star, like, like 6'4", 260. What are you talking about? So we're like, okay, let's watch the film. And that was the first two things we said, Ryan. One was this kid's a center. The second one was what? You remember?
Nasty, or
this kid's really nasty. Not even athletic. The athletic thing wasn't even the first thing we talked about. Like, we talked about that next, but it was like, dude, this kid is physical. Like, this kid is nasty. And that's something that I think you have to have. Like, that was the thing about Emil Wagner that kind of eventually sold me on a senior film. Like, I was really against Emil Wagner early on because I'm like, dude, I don't see the frame. But especially as a senior, you saw a kid like, but this kid's really physical. This kid he doesn't have to be 310 because he's strong and physical. He doesn't have to get to 305, 310, 315 because he has that punch, that length, that physicality, that toughness. Same thing with Joe. Joe doesn't have to get to 305 because he's got a level of punch and physicality in the demeanor that says, he could do a 295, 290 and be okay because of the quickness, the pad level, just the natural strength. Because when you see him, Ryan, when he uses his hands, and he uses his hands pretty well, he's violent. I mean, he's got very strong, natural hands. And that was the first thing that popped out to us on film.
One thing that a great quote that's going to be in the piece tomorrow, not to, give too much out there, but I talked to Coach Arnold this morning, Brian. This is one of my favorite quotes. It was like, this kid is the most well-mannered, just soft-spoken kid. But when he gets a helmet on, he gets a little crazy. Like, he literally said he gets a little crazy. I'm like, that matches perfectly, man. Him pulling, him working in space, which people are going to say, like, why is movement so important to the center position? Because a lot of times you're uncovered and you're working up to the second level. You have to play in space a little bit, play it to linebackers and other second level defenders. And you see that athleticism. It's easy. Maybe we'll throw you out a couple of high school basketball highlights that just kind of,
we're going to show those.
Yes. Oh yeah. We just got to show, man, because this kid's a skilled player. This isn't just a big guy posting up and doing some work down low. Like, this kid is pulling up, handling the ball a little bit. This is a gifted athlete who, like Brian said, has a mean streak to him as well.
I'm going through kind of my notes that I took on him when I'm breaking down his film. And one of the notes I have, Ryan, is violent. He's a violent football player. And I think now's a great time to bring up the film of Joe Otting and break that down, right? Because I know that's the best way to show. We can talk about it all day, but let's show it, right? And let people kind of see, that potential. Because look, the one thing we're gonna just let's get it out of the way now, right? And I said this in my class impact. The size is the concern, and it's filling out, and it's the reason I give him a 3.5-star grade is because of the size, and I got to see him fill out because he's not ready to play right now, right? So there's the lower floor because of the size, but the ceiling is much higher, and he's an Ashton Craig, Joe Alt, and I said this last year, Ryan. give me a Joe Alt and an Ashton Craig every year, and Joe Otting is this year's version of Joe Alt and Ashton Craig. Yes, he's going to maybe need some time to fill out, but the other tools are really good. And if that part shows up, then this kid's got a chance to have a high ceiling, which is why he has a 4.5-star upside grade. So let's dive into his film, Ryan, and take a peek at Joe Otting's film. And it doesn't take us long to get to the part you talked about where you see the violence and just the physicality and the athleticism of this young man.
Oh man, I feel so bad for these kids because for people that don't know, he plays at Hayden High School that's in Kansas. So not playing the highest level of football, but man, I feel like this is just a pancake.
Look at this kid's chest. Like the kid's chest goes back.
Yeah, he's got some natural power to him, which is really nice to see for a guy that needs to fill out. Like there's core strength there to work with.
He down blocks this guy off the screen. And again, look, we understand he's playing against not great competition. And that's part of the reason you need to get this kid on campus and size him up and see how he moves and all that kind of stuff. But here's another note that I have, Ryan. Finisher.
Yes.
He does a lot of that stuff right there.
Yep.
So talk people through, Ryan, just kind of talk people through like, what the athletic aspects of it and just the different things you see from this kid to make you like him as much as you do.
Yeah, I mean, you see the initial explosion out of his stance, right? Like I think that there's explosiveness through his hips. The one thing that I always look for when I watch, especially interior offensive linemen, is when you make contact, you're always taught to run your feet through contact. But there's some guys that just the natural power through their hips just transfers so effortlessly. And that's where that athleticism is for me. Like this kid is a powerful athlete. It's not just that he's fleet of foot, which he is. He can work to the second level and laterally really well. But you can tell when he makes contact, he's got easy power through his hips. He can just roll through it. I mean, look at this working in space. It's not easy. I played offensive line in high school. It is not easy tracking down a linebacker or a safety or second level defender in space. But he makes it look so effortless for a guy his size, which we're talking aiming points, of course. There's technique to it. There's good eye discipline, all those things. But if you're not a good athlete, you're going to miss your target more often than not. And this kid, I think the athleticism just pops on film, whether it's as a nimble athlete and whether it's like jet lat right there, where you see that hit power being able to roll through contact.
I think the thing that you notice too in this film is you're going to see the kid line up at 3 different positions. He's played right guard, left guard, and left tackle. When you watch some of the game film, the kid shows up and he's playing right guard and left guard in the same game. Because that's what some option teams will do. They'll have like the quick side, strong side, so it's like based on what the call is, depending on where you're going to go. The fact that he can switch between right-handed and left-handed in the middle of the game too also says a lot about this kid's dexterity and this kid's, just the fact that he can play with both hands, and it just adds to his versatility and those type of things. I mean, he's got a lot. Right there, is that him at H-back there? Yes.
Yes.
No, that's him at tackle. That's left tackle, but he's just off the ball. But yeah, I mean, you see it. You see the kid doing a lot of different things in the middle of a game, and he's a talented kid. Again, just the only concern is, can he fill out? Can he get to the necessary size? And and that's why his ranking is understandably going to be lower than some other kids in the class because he doesn't have that body type. But this is the kind of kid. I said it about Ashton Craig last year. This is the kind of kid. I said it about Joe Alt the year before. He goes to Iowa, and where I was wrong about Joe Alt is this part of it. Goes to Iowa, you don't hear from him for 2 years, and the next thing you know, out of nowhere, the kid's a first-team All Big Ten player, right? And that's what Iowa and Wisconsin have been making just a living off of for years is exactly this kind of player, and that's what I think Joe Otting brings to the table. He's just that typical kid. That's what he say. You can say whatever you want about the rankings, but when Kirk Ferentz and Harry Hiestand want a kid, I'm paying attention.
Yep. And he's a kid too, Brian, where although he's playing at a lower level, it seems like he really is coached pretty well, man. Like his aiming points are pretty good. His ability to work in space, angles, everything looks pretty solid in that regard too.
And this is some clips of him on defense, obviously. I like that quickness off. I mean, he's not a defensive player, right? But like this is a nice first step for a kid who's going to project as an offensive lineman. is a really athletic, talented football player. You know, like look at that move. Like look at that. The change of direction here is again for a kid that projects as an offensive lineman is what we're talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love guys that play both sides of the football, man. That just
Yeah.
tells you. I mean, it translates, right? Because it's like this kid is the best player on his team, and that translates. I talked to the coach, and he said, Brian, that he's had one kid that's going to Kansas State. He's had one or two, I think, that went to Air Force. This is the highest level kid that he's ever had. So this kid is playing a man amongst boys at his level.
Watch this hand play. He rips this, smacks this guy's hands away, then rips through. Like that requires some quickness. Smack his hands away, then rip through is not an easy thing to do.
Nope.
Again, it's about hand speed. And I'll say this too, Ryan, and you can, oh goodness, you can see it here. He's not a really super long guy, but he doesn't have short arms either. For an interior guy, his length is to me a plus as an interior player for me. As an interior player for me. Because you don't want a guy whose arms are too long, and you don't want a guy whose arms are too short inside, right? Because the too long as a center, it's not an issue at guard as much, but as a center, you can have too long arms. And honestly, I think that's been a bit of an issue for Jarrett Patterson at times. Is when because he has a high number of snap infractions because it is a longer process for him because he's a long guy. Like I think he has like tackle length, in my opinion. I won't be shocked if he has length that makes some people
30.
gee, could this could he play
like
tackle?
33 and some odd inch arms? Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked either. Yep.
You also don't want like a guy with like really short alligator arms either. You want a guy that's got that, and I think Joe has that. Like Sam Mustafa had pretty decent length for a 6'2" guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but it wasn't too long, and I think Joe brings a lot of that to the table. So we're gonna pull up the basketball film, Ryan. Don't worry. I'm pulling it up now. So we're gonna see we're gonna see the kid playing basketball. This is
I think I watched this first, Brian. I was so excited about it. I'm pretty sure I sent this one to you. Yeah.
And then you went disrespected his points per game in the article. His mom was not happy about that, which is hilarious. She was so sweet. She was so nice about it too. She was like, we're joking, like she's busted your chops. She really didn't. She was like, hey, just wanted to let you know, like, right. She thanked us for the article and really appreciated we gave him respect and didn't just hammer them. Oh, why are they all from the 3-star kid? It was very kind and things. She go and just by the way, the 8.6 points per game was his sophomore numbers. He actually averaged 15.5 last year. And when you found out she was a hooper in college, like, okay, now I understand why she took that a little bit, So let's get to some.
Might have to get Mrs. Otting on the podcast one day.
There you go. She'll school you on hoops and stuff. So let's watch. So the reason we're popping in the high school basketball film is because we want you guys to watch his feet and the athleticism. Like this is a very coordinated, very skilled, coordinated kid. Like it's an impressive deal, and you can see the attitude on the basketball court as well. This is him coming on defense.
One thing we didn't mention too, Brian, is that he is a basketball player as well. So, immediately, I'm pretty sure that the coach told me he's up to around 270, 275 pounds just after basketball season, right? Like that's where guys usually add a ton of weight. Basketball probably keeps his weight down for him.
I want to show these last two clips again. You see the length here when he goes for this ball with this, this a little bit of a high. Look at that length. Gets down, comes back up. This is another example of just the agility and the skill, the coordination that this kid has. Like,
oh man, I love the footwork in the post, man. I love it.
Popping threes, money. Yeah. Yep. Money. Look at that stroke. Bam.
It's clean, man. It's clean.
Yep. Very skilled. Again, you see the athleticism here. Another three. Bam. You can't leave him open. And look, he leaves it up there for a minute. I love this kid's got some swagger. Like, okay, I'm just going to let that hang up for a minute. Let everybody know you shouldn't have left me. Oh, I got this. Very quick, very agile kid. Stop leaving him. Come on. Do you guys not read your scouting reports? Come on.
He's got really good footwork in the post, though, man. You see that foot quickness, and he's a really smart player. Like, he just has really good skill as a basketball player.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, come on now. You're not blocking that shot. Look at that spin move. I mean, we're being serious now. Like this is the foot quickness that we're talking about, right? Like that requires quickness, agility, It requires athletic skill. This isn't just, you know what I mean? Like, oh, do you see that? That was a buzzer beater. Watch this. See the clock going down? Gets it off quick, buzzer beater to win the game. Well, at least to put them up. It looked like it was 41-40. Little pick and roll, pop it out. Got to get out. Come on, y'all. Read your scouting reports. Oh, look at that. No look pass.
Oh, yeah.
Dig it.
Oh, love it.
Dig
To
it.
the lefty in the corner, too. Oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're having a little fun here, obviously, but this stuff does matter.
Right.
I mean,
It does.
coaches love
It
multi-sport
does.
athletes. They love it.
Yes. Well, and it just gives you, and Harry Heastand's been known in the past when kids play basketball to go show up at their basketball games because it allows you see their conditioning level. You know, does this kid run up and down the court 5 times and he's tapping out, you know, or he needs a breather? Is after a couple minutes on film, is he kind of the last guy down the court? You know, what kind of motor does he have? And then, of course, you see the footwork, you see the hand-eye coordination. There's a lot you can learn about a kid athletically. It doesn't necessarily translate to football specifically, but it gives you a sense of what he can do athletically and
Sure.
from a competitive standpoint and from a conditioning standpoint, because obviously you got to be in pretty good shape to play basketball. You know, and the point is, if this kid's 260 playing basketball and he's lumbered up and down the court and he's got every 3-4 minutes he's tapping out, then that kid's going to struggle to put on 300 pounds and be able to play college football, right? And that's why that matters. Where if a kid can be 260 and he's, you know, averaging 15.5 points a game, he's on the court, he's running up and down the court, he's driving to the hoop and those type of things, and okay, this is a kid that can handle putting on some weight because he's a really good athlete, he's in great shape, you know, so he can handle that weight a lot better. So no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very skilled basketball player as well. So we just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of a taste of some of his basketball skills. So just so athletically you could see what this kid brings to the table. Now, again, the same question that we had at the beginning still exists now, and that is going to be whether or not Joe can fill out and you know, be 290 plus, 295 plus. Those are questions, but we can't answer those today. You know, I mean, those are going to be answered over the next couple of years. But what we can address and what there is to like is the fact that this kid athletically is very skilled athlete and a lot of power, as we saw from the film. So I think those are all fair questions. And again, like I said before, I mean, he had offers from his region. He had all the right offers, right? Iowa State, Notre Dame, Nebraska, Kansas State, you know, all the right schools that you want to make sure the kid has offers from. He has offers from, right? And
I mean, can we talk about for a second the fact that we talked about him playing at a lower level of competition in Kansas. That also means that there's not as much exposure for him too. So people always say like 3-star. Sometimes if a player isn't from a great region or isn't from a school that produces a lot of talent, they get a little underrated. I just don't see how you can watch this kid and not think that he's a 4-star caliber player. I just don't agree with that.
Right. So that is Joe Otting, everybody, from a film standpoint. You know, there's a lot to like there. You know, again, on the football field, there's a lot to like. On the basketball court, there's a lot to like. This isn't a kid that's a really good at basketball player that you got to kind of project for him to play football. He's great at both. And I think it just kind of shows his athleticism. I believe, did I also see that he does some track stuff, like some throws, or am I confusing him with somebody else?
I think he does. That's usually a little three thing that they usually do. I'm going to look it up, but I'm pretty sure he's a shot putter, if I remember correctly.
So, yeah, so that is Joe Otting. Now, look, I understand it. Not a sexy pick. If you're someone who looks at that, I'm not criticizing. I understand it. I understand the other aspect of people say, well, he doesn't have any big offers, and they're going to talk about Alabama and Ohio State. I get all that. As I've said before, though, the offers that can matter most to me are the offers that involve schools that are really good at developing that position. And when you look at that position, this is a kid that to me is a, you know, it checks all the right boxes, in my opinion. And, you know, he's already ranked higher on 2 of the services than what Tyler Linderbaum was coming out. And I should point out, looking at On3, it says here that Tyler Linderbaum was listed at 6'2", 255 coming out of high school by them. And then Rivals listed him 247 Sports listed him at 6'3", 290. And then Rivals listed him at 6'2", 270, those are always kind of funny. So,
So he
just to,
he is a shot putter, Brian. Just looked it up.
okay,
48.5 inch shot putter as a
okay,
junior. So pretty solid number. Good number.
okay. So that is Joe Otting, Ryan. So
Mhm.
let's talk specifically about the center position. I gave my opinion on it early. I want to kind of get your thoughts on it now. When you watch him play, and you and I have broken down his film several times, and once we realized he was going to commit, we went back in again to just kind of to kind of see what we thought. And just I come to the same opinion. So I just want to as now that we've kind of narrowed down where we see his position. Number one, he doesn't have to only play center; he could play guard, but the center is the position they're recruiting him. How specifically to the Notre Dame offense now, Ryan?
Yep.
How do you see the fit? How do you see the transition from a skill set standpoint to that position?
Well, I think one thing that Notre Dame does well is that they kind of mix up the run game a little bit. But I mean, there is a heavy, obviously, inflection of inside and outside zone, right? And I think when you're talking about that type of system for the center, you have to be able to move, work to the second level, work laterally and outside zone scheme. Those things really matter from the center position. And I thought Pendleton, and we've talked about this before, I think Pendleton can play center, but I don't think that's his best position, right? I watched this kid immediately and I'm like, that's a center. Like that, he's long term. I'd be surprised if he wasn't a really good center. So, like you said, Jared Patterson's going after this year. 2 years from now, you're talking about Zeke Correll being a fifth-year guy, Michael Carmody being a senior at that point. What is the next step at center is a big question mark. And the good thing about Joe is we've talked about it. He needs development. He needs time in the weight room, but he's not going to be forced into action right away, most likely, unless something happens, right? So he's going to have that time. Right. And I think this kid could be the center of the future. It's very possible because he has all the tools. It's just about reaching that height as far as from a physical development perspective.
I'm looking here too, Ryan, real quick. And Tyler Linderbaum on the Iowa roster. So the official Iowa roster as a true freshman was listed at 6'2", 270 on the University of Iowa roster as a true freshman. So I just thought that was noteworthy.
I actually heard a story, Brian, that he was only about 260 pounds when he was a redshirt freshman playing center. So yeah, Tyler Linderbaum was very small. He finally bulked up to like 296 at the combine, I think, but everybody knew that he played in the 280s at most during Iowa career.
Right. So okay. So let me, and he was only listed at 6'3", 290 on the roster last year. So talk to me about, that's an undersized guy. Why was Tyler Linderbaum able to be successful in just using him as example? And is that a guy that you'd consider a comp for Joe? Is Joe a different kind of player? Because that's one thing we get asked a lot. Because I know you were super high on Tyler Linderbaum coming into the draft and thought, I believe if I remember correctly, you thought that the Ravens made a great move to get back into the end of the first round to take him, correct? So just kind of compare it just so people can kind of understand that 260, 265, 270 doesn't mean that a guy has to, can't get to 305, 310 because he doesn't have to get to 305 to 310. I think Linderbaum's a perfect example.
Well, it's a play style perspective, right? Like it's Tyler Linderbaum was not going to be for everyone at the next level, but for teams that maximize movement skill at center, they love the kid because he's a special athlete. The one thing, Brian, I'll always say is you can't be small and unathletic, right? Like you have to have one of those. And I think that you see a lot of those things with Joe Otting. Like the kid can move in space, and he is a really good mover to the second level, laterally, inside outside zone scheme. I think he's going to be a great fit for those. We'll see how the weight develops. We'll see how the physical development happens from that sense. But yeah, I think that the parallels are interesting because, like you said, Linderbaum was actually a defensive lineman to start his Iowa career, so it wasn't even a certainty that he was going to be a center. But what Kirk Ferentz and that staff maximized out of him is he's a really gifted athlete for that position. So think of, again, not a direct comparison, but in a similar vein to Tyler Linderbaum, Jason Kelsey, like that's your brand of center that you're looking at right here. Guys that you want to get in space. The movement skills are what Joe Otting brings to the table.
Let me ask you this question, Ryan, when you look at a guy like, or let me make this comment and make sure that people understand this. I've seen some stuff in the chat and others, and people say, if you take Joe Otting, you run the risk of not being able to take Monroe Freeling or Charles Jagasol. And all. Listen, this has nothing to do with those two players. We'll have that conversation here in a minute when we talk about what's next in the offensive line, but he was recruited to play center. And so any impact he has is on a guy like Sam Pendleton, meaning Sam Pendleton doesn't have to project at center. Right. So you understand, as we said, and I wrote about this in the class impact, Notre Dame had two huge needs they had to fill in this class. Improve the depth at tackle. That remains to be seen. That's still a work in progress. You needed to find a center. And Joe Otting fills that need for Notre Dame in regards to being the center prospect. So that is now set. That is now set. Notre Dame has their center. They have one other interior player. Now it's about focusing on, now you look at filling out your tackle position. And so Elijah Page, Charles Jagasaw, Monroe Freeling, those guys are going to battle it out for 2 spots or 3, depending on what's going to go. But you're not getting those guys because of this commitment. There's another commitment that could happen that would have a greater impact on those. But just understand that Joe Otting fills a need that had yet to be filled and wasn't going to be filled by the guys left on the board. He wasn't going to be filled by Elijah Page, Monroe Freeling, or Charles Jagasaw. And I'm just going in order of when guys visit for that 3. So just want to make sure that we understand that this is a different situation. He is filling a need for a position that currently they didn't have anybody that could fill it, that where it was their number one fit as a position. Because I think the point you made earlier about Sam Pendleton is important, Ryan. Could Sam Pendleton have been a center? I think he could have, but would that have been the first place you'd want to put him? No, and that matters.
Yeah, he's more. So just for a comparison's sake, like Sam Pendleton playing center is more Josh Myers than it is these outside zone heavy schemes, right? Because he's more of a power dictated type of player. Can he do it? Sure, but your offensive system may have to be a little bit different than what you would have with a Joe Otting at center. And it's a great point, Brian. Like, again, this isn't replacing a Charles Jagasaw or Monroe Freeling. Like, this is no indication of the offensive tackle board. They found a center. Harry Hiestand found a center in the 2023 cycle that he thought could be the guy, right? Like, he thought development-wise, he could be a player for me down the road. That's where Joe Otting comes into this. This has nothing to do with the offensive tackle board. So great point there.
I want to mention this too. Like Zach Martin, one of our longtime contributors, says, is Billy Schrouth being considered for center? He says, I know, but he played the All-American game at center and looked solid. And he says, if he's one of your best 5 and is a center, just a thought. And my point is, yes, I do think Billy Schrouth. I mean, any player. I mean, Jared Patterson was recruited to play left tackle and quickly got moved. You're going to move guys to get your best 5 on the field. The issue is, however, and I've always felt this about Jared Patterson, and we've talked about this before. Yes, Jared Patterson proved to be a great center, but I still don't think the center was his best position. I still feel like if the need was there, Jared Patterson would have been a really good tackle. And you know, that's why I'm the only reason that we're hesitant to move him now is just because he's been at center so long. But I would never argue that coming into college, that was his best center or his best position was center. And so the point with like Schrouth and some other guys with like you mentioned with Sam Pendleton, it's not that they can't play center, but if they're not as good at center as they are at another position, but they're still one of the best 5, then you're not getting the most out of that kid. And I think that's what Notre Dame is weighing with Jared Patterson is like, okay, we feel we may actually get more out of Jared Patterson as a blocker, maybe not as a leader and making calls, but as a blocker, as a guard. And Zeke Correll obviously is more comfortable at center. And I think that's an example that shows just because you can play one interior spot doesn't mean you can play the other. Because Zeke Correll looked like a legitimate Power 5 starting center against North Carolina and Alabama in 2020, right? A developing one, a guy that still needed to work, but he could hang in those moments. And then last year looked like a guy that shouldn't be on scholarship at a place like Notre Dame. And then this spring as a center again, and he was a guard last year. Now is back at center. He looks like that dude again that we saw a couple of years ago. That was a top 100 recruit coming to high school. So just because you can play another doesn't mean that, and this is what we've said before, getting your best 5 on the field doesn't mean you can just put anybody anywhere. Some guys can't play all 5 positions, and guys like Jared Patterson are rare. And we saw that with Zeke Correll. Now, is that true of Billy Schrouth? I don't know. Is that true? I mean, can Ashton Craig play center? We're going to find out. Never seen him do it before. Billy Schrouth looked like he could hang a center. There's no doubt, but he's still a better guard. And so that's why it is important to get a guy like a Joe Otting in this class and Ashton Craig last year, so that way you have those options. You don't have to put Billy Schrouth at center. Now, could you move Billy Schrouth to center if that's the only spot that's open and he's clearly one of your best 5? No doubt about it. No doubt. I think you could even move Billy Schrouth to right tackle if the need arose. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel he could be a versatile guy. But Joe Otting, like you said, Ryan, he's got the height and the length and the leverage, like how he plays from a leverage standpoint to be a center. And then athletically, he's got all the tools that you want to be a center. His quickness, his fires off the ball. And then the final piece that to me to projects a center, I think your potential is limited at center or capped at center if you don't have really strong hands. I think, and I think that's another reason why I think that Jarrett Patterson was able to. I think Jarrett. I don't know if I would call Jarrett Patterson incredibly strong. Like, I don't think he's going to go to the combine and throw up like 33 reps, but I think he's got strong hands.
Quick,
but
too.
even then, I think he's going to be even better at guard, where he can now use both hands to block. This is a kid, and this is one thing I liked about Ashton Craig last year, and I like about Joe Otting now, is he's got really heavy hands to where he can snap and punch at the same time and be able to hold his own and be effective, which not everybody can be that way. And so those are more reasons why I think the fit is there for this kid.
Yeah, and I think the important part of the hand usage is the hand strength is you have light hands a lot, right? Because it's difficult to snap and then get into the motion of blocking. It's not an easy thing. And then you also think about blocking back if there's a pulling guard, right? Like, and you have to have strong hands to hold momentum there. So yeah, I mean, you're playing in tight spaces a ton. So inside it matters a ton, whether we're talking about center or guard, you have to have strong hands. But the big plus for a guard is that usually you have a little more time than you have at center, right? Like, you have to get that snap off, come out hard, get solid hand position, good angles, good aiming points, all that stuff in a very short amount of time. So yes, I think that the hand strength is very important. I think the athleticism is very important. And then one thing that can't be undersold as well is whether because Joe had played guard and tackle during his Hayden career. And whether he was at guard or tackle, Coach Arnold was the one that was making the line calls. It wasn't the center. It was always Joe Otting. So that communication aspect of being able to set protections and having that type of thing. He said in his entire career, Joe Otting is the only player that he has ever let set protections for his offensive line. So that communication aspect, I think, is huge, obviously, for center, which is hard to quantify for a high school.
Was it always quarterbacks before or the coaches before?
I think coaches and quarterbacks. I think there was a combination there, but he was the first offensive lineman he has ever let set the protections up front.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how we kind of always wrap this up, right, Ryan? Is after we've talked about the player, we talk about what's next. And I think this is the really interesting aspect of what's next. Because I believe there's 3 players on the board left for Notre Dame on the offensive line. And I can only confidently say that there's 2 spots. We're going to dive more into this specifically as far as who is going to come or not next week, but let's just kind of set the table. This is now your 3rd offensive line commitment in the 2023 class. Mm-hmm. You've got Sam Pendleton and Joe Otting, who are interior players, even though Pendleton plays tackle in high school, but we project him as an interior player. You have Sullivan Absher, who it's kind of funny. You and I feel the same way about Absher and Jagasaw. It's just reversed, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I believe you see Absher as a tackle first, guard second, correct?
And I kind of prefer him inside of guard.
You've kind of come down to him being an inside guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Jagasaw I see as a tackle that could be an inside guy, and obviously Freeling and Elijah Page are tackles.
Pure tackles.
In my opinion. Pure tackles. So you've got sort of 3 of your spots done. You've kind of got your interior handled now. You know, now again, they recruited Sullivan Absher as a tackle. They're going to give him a chance at tackle, but we always know those kind of tackles for Notre Dame have a chance to move inside. He's a Josh Lugg caliber kind of player. Mm-hmm. So now it's about finding tackles. That's the emphasis now. That's the key. And Notre Dame has 3 kids on the board. One is already visited for this month. That's Elijah Page. We talked about him yesterday. Notre Dame absolutely knocked that visit out of the park. Notre Dame is going to be hosting Monroe Freeling this weekend, and then they will have Charles Jagasaw on campus. I'm not sure if I got to talk to Sean. He's not coming from the 17th to the 19th, like that Friday to Sunday. I believe he's going to show up on Sunday and then stay till like Monday or Tuesday for his official visit, and then that'll be the last of his visits. So it's those 3 guys, and Notre Dame for sure has two spots left. And my understanding is they're going to take the first 2 of those 3 that want to commit. That's my understanding of it. Now, depending on how the order goes of who wants to commit when, it's going to be tough. But I'll just say this. There's a lot of talk about 6 offensive linemen and all those kind of things. I'll say this. So talking to sources, it won't be easy, but Notre Dame has not closed the door on 6 offensive linemen. And the reason why is that the guy that they expect to pick last from just a timing standpoint is Monroe Freeling, who has said adamantly he's going to carry this into the fall. My understanding is if you're not going to say it, it's going to be tough to do, but we're open to it, is because of him and Jagasol being the last. Most likely, Jagasol and Freeling will be the last 2 guys to make a decision. I think Elijah Page is going to make a decision this month for whoever. And then we expect Jagasol to has said to Sean that he could see himself wrapping things up end of June into July. And then, of course, Freeling has been adamant, Ryan, I could change my mind, but there's always that but. I'm pretty consistent into the fall. So it's a work in progress. But what I know is that of those 3 guys, Notre Dame views all of them as kind of being on the same level. Now, we can all agree to disagree or whatever the case may be, but because how we feel about it. And like for me personally, Ryan, I know you agree. You don't turn down Monroe Freeling. You don't. He's too good.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
But I'll say this also, but Notre Dame also feels the same way about Charles Jagasol and Elijah Page. Now, we can agree to disagree with them, all that. That's fine. But I'm just telling you how Notre Dame feels. And us here, we're not agree with it because Notre Dame says so kind of thing, right? No one's infallible. But you and I understand the dilemma that Notre Dame find themselves in, because from the minute we started watching Elijah Page, he doesn't have the floor of Monroe Freeling and Charles Jagasol. This kid's got an incredibly high ceiling. Yep. And I love Charles Jagasol and obviously Monroe Freeling we both view as a dude. So that they're in an interesting situation now moving forward, Ryan, because they can only guarantee 2 more spots. And there's 3 guys that they view as big time players, because you have to understand something. To Harry Heastan, Tommy Rees, they do not care one bit about rankings. Not one bit. They look for potential, upside. What can this guy be if he fills out his potential? And when they see these 3 kids, they view all of them in a very similar light. If this kid reaches his full potential, he could be a star. I'm just telling you what I'm told. And Elijah Page the same way. And then when they met Elijah Page, one of the things I was told about him during his visit is he has ballooned. And I shouldn't say ballooned because that makes it seem like fat. He has filled out big time. Yeah. Like he's 3 bills now already, is what I was told. And it's a healthy 3 bills, meaning like this kid's going to be huge. So that is something that kind of swayed them as well, right? Because when you and I were watching the film, we're like, I don't know how big this kid is. Like, maybe he was listed like 290, 295, and we're like, I don't know if he's that big, right? And he told us he was 280 on film, like 275, 280 on film. And you just didn't see that big size and all that. But you loved the frame and the length and the athleticism was all there. Well, if he's already 3 bills now, and I saw a picture of him from camp, and Ryan, it is a solid, it's a well put together 300 pounds. You start to say, okay, the size is there, but then you got to evaluate these 3 guys. So they're in a very, very unique situation. And I said this yesterday, Ryan, and I said it, you just kind of then moved on. I want to get your opinion on it.
Yep.
I am, and it's the 3rd time I've said it, I am vehemently and belligerently against taking 6 offensive linemen in one class. I'm against over signing at a position. But for anything, just like I'm against putting all your eggs in a quarterback basket. But there are always exceptions to the rule. Like Dante was an exception to the rule of quarterback. We'll see how that pans out. We'll talk about that in another show. This is one of those years in an offensive lineman where when I look at what's in front and I look at what's behind, I believe that I would take 6. And I'll state my case here in a minute, but I first wanted to kind of throw the floor to you and say, is this a year that you would consider figuring out a way to make room for 6 guys in this class?
That was like one of the first things we talked about on the phone yesterday, right? When you hear that things are trending well with Joe Otting, things are trending well with Elijah Page, your initial thought is we thought it was 4 to 5 players, 5 offensive linemen kind of being the cap, but there's 3 really good players that are still on the board, man. And we know timeline wise, the first thing I asked was, what's that mean for Monroe Freeling? Because that's, that would take it to 6, because he was in theory the last guy that's going to make his college decision. And that I am a big advocate of this. You cannot not take, I know it's a double negative, but you cannot not take Monroe Freeling. You can't. I mean, the kid, in my opinion, and I know he's, a top 100 player, but in my opinion, no matter where he ends up, this is a top 50 player in this class.
We both have him graded as a top 50 guy.
Yeah, he's tremendous, man. Like I would argue that he's a top 30 player. Like I think of that highly of him. He is a fantastic football player. So yes, take it to 6 if Monroe Freeling wants to come. Absolutely. Because I love Charles Jagasaw's upside. I love Monroe Freeling's upside. And I like Elijah Page. I was like, for a while, if you're going to take 5, Elijah Page at the 5th in the ideal world is great. Like, I love Elijah Page's upside. But all I'm going to say is with the timeline, how it's going to end, you have to go to 6, in my opinion. I don't know if it's a reality, but in my opinion, you should go to 6 because Monroe Freeling's special.
Sure. Let me ask you this question.
Yep.
Let's say you get Elijah Page, right? Let's say he commits soon. And then let's say Monroe Freeling decides during his visit that he wants to come too. Do you say no to Charles Jagasaw? Because I think that's the problem. Like, I can't talk myself into saying no to any of these guys. And that's the problem. Now you can say, well, they shouldn't have taken this, but they took those guys and they like those guys. And I think Sam Pendleton brings something different to the table, that you're looking for something different than what those other guys bring to the table.
Yeah.
And so I look at it and I say, you couldn't have said no to the guys that you had, because you would have needed to hit the inside straight to go past 5. You needed to get everybody. Well, that's kind of where we think they are. Because I think the one thing is, I don't think Notre Dame is as confident in their position with Monroe Freeling as you and I are in their position with Monroe Freeling. I think that's the concern. Right. I think the concern is that you turn one of these kids down, and then Monroe Freeling picks Clemson or Georgia or Bama down the road, and now you didn't get the 5. And I think because of some circumstances on the current team that I'm not comfortable talking about, that I think people know what I'm referring to, there's now a greater need for a 5th offensive lineman in this class. And so I think the circumstances have changed in some ways to me to say, look, we can't say no to Page or Jagasaw because we view them as big-time players and then lose Freeling down the road. I think the reason for the openness to 6 is more about what you just said. We can't say no to Page. We can't say no to Jagasaw because they're too good, but we definitely also cannot say no to Freeling. That's my read of the situation. I know other people are saying that they're not pushing for. Trust me, Notre Dame loves Monroe Freeling. I think the only concern here is some people at Notre Dame aren't as confident with where they stand with him. Right. I think it's more about them just not knowing how to read him than it is anything else. And I've tried to make that clear to people that I think you're reading him wrong, but we'll see. We'll see. But the point is that I will say this: you have to get one of Page or Freeling. You cannot miss on both of them.
You mean Jagasaw and Freeling?
No. Page and Freeling.
Okay.
Page and Freeling. And the reason why is because they're the only pure left tackle types on the – now, look, a left tackle can play right tackle, right? Sure. You and I agree on that. But a right tackle can't always play left tackle in a pro-style offense. And Notre Dame is a pro-style offense. So between Page and Freeling, you have to get at least one of them in order for me to say – because it's not just about getting 3 tackles, Ryan. You got to get somebody that can play left tackle, right? And I think that's the key. That's the key, is getting one of those guys that can be a pure left tackle. And that's why I say Page. Jagasaw is important too. I'm just saying between those two, I think they're going to get Jagasaw. We feel good about where they are there. Between Page and Freeling, you've got to get one of the two, because you have to get at least one guy in this class that can be a pure left tackle. Because if Emil Wagner can't fill out, because again, we have similar questions with Emil. Here's the difference between Emil Wagner and Joe Otting. First, if somebody's thinking like, wait a minute, what? Hold on. He's listed as the same weight as Emil Wagner. What's the issue? When you look at Joe Otting, you see a thick, lower-bodied kid, right? So he's going to have to add weight here. The problem with Emil Wagner is he's got a thin lower body. He's got a tight end, defensive end, lower body. He does not have an offensive lineman lower body. That's a concern with Emil. And if he answers that, then he's going to be fine. He's got 5-star upside is what I gave him last year. It's about, can he fill out? So, and Joe, I'm not as concerned about that, to be honest with you. But you need tackles, and if Emil can't pan out, then you don't really have a whole lot of left tackles left on the board, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. Yeah. I mean, that layer is really important because we've talked about this, right? Like, I think we see Sullivan Absher pretty similarly. It's like, okay, he's going to get a shot at right tackle, but most likely he might be a guard long term. We'll see what happens. Charles Jagasaw, if he's a tackle, he's a right tackle. Like, he's not going to be a left tackle in Notre Dame's system. Elijah Page absolutely has left tackle traits, and Monroe Freeling has special left tackle traits. So you can't miss on one of those players. I agree completely. You have to get at least one of them in the class. Otherwise, you're gambling. Like, I don't like forcing yourself into a corner, right? Like, you want options so that you make the best option. You don't want to make an option. You don't want to have to make a move out of desperateness, right? Out of disparity. You don't want to do that. And I like Emil Wagner. I think he has upside, but if he doesn't pan out, what are the other options that are on the board? You need those players so you have options. That's what this recruiting cycle is about. It's about the depth at certain spots so that you have options. You're not forced into playing players that aren't ready or aren't suitable for their role.
Yeah. I saw something, Ryan, that just I found flipping hilarious. D Troll Hunter says, I feel like Brian weekend hangouts with Harry Easton, and they just grumpily watch film together and call not done, Ryan, and call Ryan to talk film.
Why am I
That's
not
never
included in
happened.
these? Why am I not included in these film breakdowns? I don't understand.
Well, because you live in Jersey. You can't come over because Coach Easton lives here. I live here. You can't come over and hang out with us. You're in Jersey.
I'll take the red eye, man. I'll take the red eye out.
With Zoom and everything, I can say that's never happened before, but I wouldn't say no. If Harry Easton called and was like, hey, man, you want to hang out and watch some film?
I would just listen, though. I wouldn't talk, man. I would just listen.
Oh, dude, if I was in the room, my only swerve, I know I talk a lot and everybody, you talk over people, whatever. It is what it is. That would be one of those times I'd be like, yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Follow-up question. Okay. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yep.
No doubt. No doubt. That'd be amazing. But that's something that you hear a lot about these kids, though, right? Is they talk a lot about, man, just watching film with Coach Easton, right? What did Joe say? Like, one of the coaches that's recruiting him talked about how he was kind of groomed by Harry Easton,
right? Wasn't it K-State's offensive line coach, I think, right? And to your point, Brian, when I talked to Elijah Page and we had a piece out today on it, he said almost word for word, he was like, it blew me away sitting there and watching film with Coach Easton because he just points out stuff that you don't even think about, right? Like, that's the difference, and they respect that, man. Like, it's because offensive line, I feel like they get a bad rap, man. Offensive line is a mental position, right? Yeah, it's not like these guys aren't just like big cavemen just roaming around, right? Like, they're smart, sharp kids.
You can do that in high school.
Really are.
You can do that in high school. You can't be like that in the NFL. I mean, in college football and the NFL, you really can't. You really can't. Let's see here. Ryan, so we've talked about the backstory. We've watched the film. We've talked about what's next. Let's kind of wrap things up here with some questions. So we'll dive into some questions. So if we'll go through and star some questions, but if you have some more questions, some recruiting questions you all would like to get to, please bring them up now and we will answer them. Here's a question from somebody's a little bitter tonight. Charlie's just seems in a great mood tonight. He says, Brian, can I ask why Harry Easton seems to go after 1A small high school kids? It's not the same competition as bigger schools, meaning linemen that weigh 250 look huge on screen compared to top recruits. Look, dude, he doesn't go after kids based on where they play. He goes after kids based on their ability. Some of these kids are at smaller schools. Some of these kids are at bigger schools. That's the reality of it. You're going to go where the talent is. And I've said this a million times. Your talent is not dictated by what's on the other side of the field, right? The fact of the matter is that Notre Dame there are times when you're watching a kid and you're like, we said this recently in a show. I'm not quite sure how big this kid is because I know he plays at a lower level of competition and I don't know how big the kids he's going against are. So I need to size this kid up for myself. We've talked about that with kids from Irish Invasion, right? We just talked about that on Monday's show. But that's why Notre Dame went out and saw him in person at the school. That's why they brought him into camp and worked him out personally, is to see if he has those kind of things. So you're assuming that Notre Dame is just watching the kids huddle film and then saying, yep, he's the dude. No, that's what gets your interest. Notre Dame is looking for kids that have certain physical skill sets, certain frames, certain sizes, and certain potential. That's what they care about. And they're not going to care about what level of ball kid came from. There are 6'8" kids from Florida who don't have the ability to project to the next level and be effective linemen. I saw somebody wrote an article the other day, and it was actually one of the most insightful things I've seen. I think it might have been an ESPN article. They say, why do people overrate line? Why the one position that recruiting services miss the most on is offensive line? And I think it's because, and I've said this a million times, I think the biggest mistake that people make is too many people in the recruiting industry, and there are coaches like this too, Ryan, that they look for the ready-made prospects. The problem is a lot of those ready-made prospects are kind of already at their peak, and people look at him and say, boy, this guy's, great player and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, because he's dominating high school football. But if you look at if you're a really good, if you're really one of the best, you're going to say, I know this kid may not be there now, right? Like none of the recruiting services thought Zach Martin was a big-time player coming out of high school. Some had him as a 4-star and all those kind of things, but nobody had him as like, this guy's a future first-round draft pick, elite player, future star type of guy, right? Nobody had him as that. And so when you look at it, you say, okay, well, what do I look for? What should I be looking for? And that's what those coaches do. That's what those coaches look for is those type of things. So, and it's kind of funny. The only outlet that ranked Zach Martin high was ESPN, but they ranked him high because he played in the Under Armour All-American game. He wasn't that high until he committed to the Under Armour All-American game. Mike McGlinchey was not a top 150 guy. Ronnie Stanley was barely inside the top 200. It's about looking for the potential and the talent. And I think that's the thing that people miss is they tend to overrate the guys that are just big bullies now, maulers now, and may overlook some things like feet or, hey, this guy's playing at such and such level. It's about looking for the skills and seeing if those skills project to the next level. And that's what Notre Dame cares about. They don't care about what level the kid plays for. You can't possibly think that Harry Hiestan's like, okay, let me look for all the 1A high school kids. Come on now. Right? Like, come on. That's not how it works. We did have a couple big super chats at the beginning. One from K Grant. Appreciate this big time, man. Thank you so much for that super chat. Really, really appreciate that. Garen Knutson also brought the super chat. We appreciate both of you all so, so much. Garen says, love me some O-line talk when we finish with CJ and EP. He's talking about Charles Jagasaw and Elijah Page. How will this O-line class stack up against the last 2 to 3 years? Of course, Freeling would be some sweet icing. It is interesting how that would stack up, Ryan. I'd have to think about that one. Off the top of my head, I'd say it's definitely better than so between 22 and 21, I ranked the 2022 class better because 2021 definitely had the best 1-2 punch in Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler as far as coming out. Then you had a guy like Joe Alt, who I gave a really high upside grade for, but he wasn't, he was a bit of a project. I thought at the time I was wrong about that. He was ready a lot sooner than I thought. And then there's a big drop off for like Caleb Johnson and Pat Coogan, especially. Last year's class, there was no Blake Fisher. There was no Blake Fisher in last year's class. I think I thought that Billy Strouth was better than Rocco Spindler. I graded him out a bit higher than Rocco Spindler. And then you look at like Emil Wagner was kind of last year's version of Joe Alt, right? Like, needs some work. Frames a question, but man, the upside is incredibly huge. But then after that, there's just good. Joey Tone is a really good football player, right? Ty Chan, I thought was overrated by some, underrated by others. He's a big, tough football player. And I love Ashton Craig. So I thought as a 5-man group, last year's class was better than the 2021 class, which was star heavy, right? Now, that class is still going to end up having an impact. Well, I think it's going to end up producing 3 starters. I think Rocco's eventually going to become a starter at Notre Dame. Last year's class, really depth. Outside of Billy, there's not a lot of certainties in last year's class for me. So it's about balancing those two things. This year's class, to me, if they get Elijah Page and Charles Jagasaw, to me, I would probably rank ahead of last year's class simply because I think there's more guys that I'm confident can play tackle for me. I'm more confident in Sullivan Absher being a tackle after seeing Ty Chan senior film than I am that Ty Chan can play a tackle. I look at Joe Otting, and Joe Otting to me graded out a little higher than Ashton Craig did at the time. And then you kind of look at it. Sam Pendleton doesn't rank as high, but Charles Jagasol to me would grade as high potential wise as Billy Shrouth. He's not where Billy was yet because Billy was more advanced technically and those kind of things, but upside wise is every bit as high. Elijah Page is every bit as high upside wise as anybody in last year's class, is kind of the way that I look at it. So that's just kind of off the top of my head. As I sit down and crunch the numbers, I may come to a different conclusion, but I think it's in competition for last year's class. But again, that's based off only seeing these kids as juniors.
Sure.
Whereas last year's film, we're kind of basing it off of where they were as seniors. And so, because some of those guys took big jumps as seniors, and so that adds into it as well.
I think one thing with last year's class too, Brian, that I've heard you talk about before is you think there's a lot of interior players in that class, but you only have really Emil Wagner that's a certainty of tackle.
Right.
If you're able to get Jagasaw and maybe a Freeling, but at least Elijah Page, right? You have a couple guys that can play tackle on top of having interior. So I think it's, if anything, I would say it's more well balanced than it has been over the last couple of years.
Yeah, because we both agree that Page is a tackle.
Yep.
And I think the other thing I'm going to speak for the both of us. You can disagree if I don't nail this right. Between Absher and Jagasol, I think we're both confident at least one of them can stick a tackle. Right? Is that fair?
Yep.
I would go with Jagasol as the better tackle option, but I think between the two of them, I think one of and I still like. You're more skeptical of Jagasol as a tackle than I am. I understand why. Don't disagree with it. I'm more confident in it because I think the technique can be there, and I think the athleticism is there and all that. But between him and Absher, they can. But one of those two is going to be able to play tackle, which to me helps solidify that tackle. I feel more comfortable with Charles Jagasol sticking a tackle than I do about Ty Chan sticking a tackle. That's kind of where I come from on the issue. So that's where I'm at when you talk about comparing those two. It's close. The point, the moral of the story, Garen, is it's similar. It's not a class loaded with elite players. It's not. Now, to me, none of the guys in this year's class, if they get Jagasol and Page, none of them are top 50 players for me right now. None of them are. Monroe Freeling would be the only one, but I have Jagasol in the top 100 for sure. Like he's a top 100 guy for me. Now, what I will also say is there's several 5-star upside guys would be in that group as well. And so like Page is a 5-star upside kid to me. Like he's got a longer road to get there, but he's got it. Jagasol is a 5-star upside guy for me, either as a tackle or a guard. Absher's 4.5-star, Pendleton's 4 to 4.5 star, and then Joe Otting's a 4.5 star, meaning top 50 caliber player, upside wise. And I think that would be the thing for me. Like I think there's a lot more high ceilings of the tackle targets, right? That's what I'm saying, like tackle targets mainly, even though I list all those guys. So that's my stance on that. Tommy Guns asked, Brian, when Jagasol commits, you're going to bring up wrestling highlights, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know if we have any. I don't know if we have them, I'll show them. Heck yeah, man. I won't have a clue what I'm talking about. So I probably just let Ryan talk about it because I don't know anything about wrestling.
I coached wrestling for a couple of years. So
okay, so that's what's up. I'll let Ryan talk about it. I'll just be like, oh, when's he going to suplex somebody? Like, wait a minute, hold on a second. There's no ropes. There's no ropes around here. Like, come on now. This isn't wrestling.
Come on, Charles. Take a shot. Hand fight. Let's go.
There you go. Toe Jam 1992 says Rivals moved Braylon James from 77th to 205th. Is that real? Yes, it is. Rivals also dropped out Jay Lamar out of the top 250. Shocker. They also dropped Cooper Flanagan out of the top 25. Shocker. They dropped Adon Schuler out of the top 250. Excuse me, not 225, 250. So Flanagan, Lamar, and Schuler all dropped out. And my response to that is, if you think that Adon Schuler is not a top 250 player, you are in the wrong line of business. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. He's a top 150 player, in my opinion.
I would make that argument. I'd be a lot more comfortable making that argument than he's not in your top 250, period. And you dropped Braylon James for what? Like what?
Right. What has he done aside for
you know,
dominating track and basketball this whole
Sure,
season? Like, what has he done?
And they were at least honest about they dropped Keon Keeley because he hasn't been to any camps, whatever. So it's the flaw in the system. Ethan O'Connor said, yes, it's silly. Ethan O'Connor says, is this the reason Zeke Correll is potentially taking over at center? I'm not quite sure what he was referring to there.
I think it was when we were talking about Patterson's ability to play multiple spots. I think it's just a flexibility of him being able to do a couple different things.
The fit. Yeah, the fit is there. Definitely. I think that's a big part of it is, you have to look and see the fit. I think that we know we know two things. Jarrett Patterson can be great at center, and Zeke Correll has not been very good at guard. And if both of them are playing extremely well at center, who's the guy you have most confidence in moving to another position? It's Jarrett Patterson. There's no doubt about it. So if we are going to look here at somebody said, Colin Park said that Jaden Osbury dropped like 41 spots. That would lead me to believe that they think he's going to pick Notre Dame. So,
that's Brian's guy too. You don't mess with Jaden Osbury.
No,
I like
Jaden Osbury.
Yeah, I like this one.
Well, they must think he's going to go
to.
They must think he's going to go to like an SEC school or something like that. So we'll see about that.
He's going to Bama. He's going to Bama.
Yeah, there you go. See if we got any more questions before we get out of here. Just see if anybody threw anything in there. I'm going to go run through and check that real quick. Okay. All right. Okay. I think that
Ethan O'Connor just said I was more referring to Zeke being able to move slightly better than Patterson.
Gotcha.
I don't think
I don't know what we can base that off of because when he moved to guard last year, he was pretty bad. Mm-hmm. He really struggled there. I think with Patterson, the reason I would go with Patterson on that one, Ethan, is I think Patterson's not built like a center. You may disagree with this, Ryan, but when I think center, I think 6'3". I think Tyler Linderbaum. I think Sam Mustipher. I think Braxton Cave. I think Tom Nalen. Right? 6'3". 290 to 295. I don't think 6'4.5", 305 with long arms and athleticism. When I see that, I think tackle. Right? Like to me, Jarrett Patterson to me has a better tackle body than Zach Martin had. I don't know if you agree with that, but body. I'm not game, body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the thing. Some of us I think it comes down to, we know that Jarrett can play center. That's the thing. And I think there's an understandable hesitation to move a guy that's been pretty good at center for 3 years away from there. Totally get that. Totally get that. No issue with that concern. But they have seen this day in and day out and they're like, Zeke is too good not to play, but we know, or we tried this last year, right? And it didn't go well. And I don't think Zeke's built like a guard as much as he is like a center. 6'2.5", 295. He's got a center body. And I think he's more comfortable there, and his game is pretty good there. And so I and again, I think we talked about this in the earlier show, Ryan, and I want to give you a chance to speak on it. It just popped in my head. Somebody asked a question about Jarrett Patterson moving to guard. And it's about, does that help his NFL draft prospects? My comment was, staying at center doesn't hurt his NFL draft prospects. Moving to guard could help his prospects even better. But the risk is, if he struggles at guard, it could hurt his NFL draft prospects from the standpoint of, as a dominant center for 4 years, people could say, hey, I think he can project the guard. I don't know it, but I'm willing to take that chance. Whereas if he moves there and struggles, they say, well, we don't think he can play guard now. He's only locked into center, but I don't think that's going to happen. So that was my take. I want to kind of get your take on, would you make this move? And if you did make this move, what would that, what could that do for his NFL draft stock from can it boost his NFL draft stock?
I mean, if Zeke Correll is one of your top 5 offensive linemen and you have to make it fit, he's the natural fit at center. Like, his body type is just more that. There's a lack of length with him. There's not a lack of length for Jarrett Patterson. So he's a potential guy that can move out a little bit, right? And I think that it can help. The more you can do at offensive line, the better you are. Like, the more versatility, position flexibility that you have is huge for offensive line. Because even if Jarrett Patterson, I don't think this, even if he ends up just being a swing player inside, more of a backup type, those guys have to be able to back up multiple positions. Like, you can't just be a center only backup, right? Like, you can't do that. But he already has the baseline. He's got good film at center. If you have good film at offensive guard, you can help yourself tremendously. There's no doubt about it.
Ethan O'Connor, so based on his follow-ups questions, when he was referring to Zeke being able to move slightly better than Patterson, he was actually referring to his movement athleticism. And I definitely don't think he moves better than Jared Patterson at all. I think Jared Patterson's a very athletic kid.
Oh yeah, I mean, I compare Jared Patterson to Alex Mack, who's one of the better athletes we've seen at center in the NFL.
Did he just retire?
Yeah, he just retired.
Okay.
Unfortunately, he was dealing with some injuries, but he was a really good player for a long time. But Ethan, my biggest thing with like the Patterson Corral thing is Patterson can play multiple spots because he has that length and he has a little more size. I just don't think Corral has size to play a guard. So I think both are good athletes. I mean, honestly, though, Jared Patterson, if he's drafted as a center, I think he's one of the more athletic. I mean, he's not a Linderbaum type of athlete, but he's a really good athlete when you take into account that he's 6'4.5", you know?
I'll say this. I've seen Jared Patterson do things in practice that you don't get a chance to see him do in games for a host of reasons, mainly because of poor coaching. I have a feeling we're going to look at him differently this year from an athleticism standpoint. And again, that's me going off of things I've seen that you haven't had a chance to see because you haven't been into practice that Jared's been in, right? So this isn't a criticism at all. It's just that when you know how they're being coached and then you see Jared moving in certain drills, you're like, that kid's pretty athletic. I think as a guard, people are going to have a different opinion of what his athleticism is like. And I think he's a much more athletic kid and you'd see flashes of it at center. But especially in 2020, when he had a better unit around him, he was really starting to find his groove late in that year, in my opinion. And so I think we're going to have a different opinion of his athleticism here moving forward. Let's bring up a super chat from Mark Stewart. My guy, Mark Stewart, just tuned in. What does this commitment mean for our O-line recruiting? 30-second version. Since you gave a super chat, I'm going to give you a 30-second version of this. Number one, I think this meets Notre Dame's need at center. That's the biggest thing, Mark, is Joe Otting is being recruited at center. They needed a center in this class based on sort of the fact that Patterson's gone. Correll's going to be a fifth year next year. There's some questions about some older players. And then again, even a guy like Michael Carmody's going to be a senior when this class arrives and those type of things. That you've now met your need at center. So it doesn't really impact the rest of O-line recruiting. This decision doesn't really impact the rest of the offensive line recruiting. What's going to impact the rest of the offensive line recruiting is going to be more so if they get somebody else other than Jagasol or Monroe Freeling before they pick. So if Elijah Page were to commit soon, hypothetically, that's where you start to see, okay, now there's some tough decisions to make. Taking Joe Otting doesn't mean, oh, geez, you have one fewer spot of those guys. That was always going to be the problem. Because if you took those three and passed on Otting, who's your center? And there wasn't a natural move. Now you have to move Pendleton there for this particular class potentially. That's not his best position, in our opinion, whereas Joe Otting is he doesn't play center, but he looks very natural there in a lot of different ways. So it's a little over 30 seconds. I think you all knew I couldn't really actually give a 30-second answer. We all know that. I think it was a minute, 10 seconds. I think that's actually pretty good.
I thought it was great, to be honest.
Yes.
I thought it was the best recap ever.
Yeah. My recaps tend to be long. I have an expression I say to my wife that she laughs at, or she still even laughs at it. I say to make a short story long, instead of long story short, I go the opposite direction. That's kind of my deal. Let me see here. It's Irish Natty within 3 years. This is an interesting one. Brian, you need to start promoting your own recruiting rankings or possibly even make it a joint effort between multiple and separate Notre Dame media. Notre Dame needs to flip the narrative when it comes to these skewed rankings. They're the sports equivalent of suppression polls. Well, for me, honestly, we do our own rankings, and we talk about them all the time. And every single profile that I have on a kid has his Irish breakdown ranking on it. And Ryan and I were just talking about the other day, I'm going to get him my grading scale so he can start doing some of these rankings as well. We've looked into doing some different things that, I don't want to get into now because if we can't deliver, I don't want to make it seem like we promised it and then we can't deliver it. But, nothing like that's ever going to happen with the rest of Notre Dame media. I mean, I'm just sorry. The Notre Dame media is very much we can't interact with other, sites. There's that whole thing, which it is what it is. I'm not changing that and not going to try to change that. It is what it is. The other thing is the other Notre Dame media all work for a bigger outlet. Blue and Gold is with On3, and I don't know what the name of the rival site is now that Eric Hansen and all those guys are a part of. but they're with Rivals, and then Irish Illustrators with 247. They can't be part of rankings that don't reflect those sites. That they would get in so much trouble. I mean, they just wouldn't be able to do that, and I understand why they can't do that. So, in fairness to them, like let's just say hypothetically that Mike Singer and Tom Loy all agreed to say we're going to come up with a Notre Dame ranking. They'd get in so much trouble from the main networks because they are affiliated with them. Our site's not affiliated with SI the same way that they are. Having said that, I do have influence on the SI 99 rankings. And that's why you saw Tobias Merriweather ranked 47th last year, because we do have an impact on that to a degree. There's some other guys that I had bumped up last year that weren't Notre Dame guys. Because, I mean, if we're going to do a ranking, I'm not pumping up Notre Dame guys just because they're Notre Dame guys. I'm going to try to give you my honest assessment. I had Tobias Merriweather there because I think that's what he is, not because he's committed to Notre Dame. I fought to keep CJ Williams in the top 100 last year after he'd already decommitted from Notre Dame, because I think CJ Williams is a top 99 player. I don't care where he goes to school. I think he's a top 99 player. I may be wrong on that. We'll find out. But so we do have an impact on the rankings. It's just our team is just smaller, and we don't do rankings just to do clickbait. We do rankings when we feel we'll do them at the end of the summer, and we'll do it at the end of the year. We're not going to release them 9 different times based on partial data just to have a release so we can get clicks. It's not how we're going to do it. John doesn't believe in that, and I support him on that. We're not going to release rankings just for clickbait. We're going to reduce rankings to bring credibility and to give an honest assessment of where we think guys should be. And then the next time we redo it will be after their senior seasons, when we have all the data that we need to give them a new ranking. And that's kind of how we're going to do it. So Irish Breakdown has its own rankings. You should check those out. And then, of course, we do work with SI All-American to help their rankings as well. So we've kind of already done that. We've already done that. And if you're on the message boards, you can always ask me questions about if you're not sure of where a kid's ranking is or whatever. Feel free to ask, and we'll help you answer that. Last question, Ryan, and then we're going to get out of here. This is one from Keith. It says, do you guys think that Elijah Page is a true left tackle, long, athletic, and light on his feet?
Yes to all 3. Yeah, actually 4 questions there. Yes, he is true left tackle. He is long, he is athletic, and he is light on his feet. I think the length is good on film. I think athletically very good. And I think that from a technical perspective, he's kind of further along. His whole thing was always sort of like Otting, a little different because they're different body types, but physical development. How much weight can you carry? How strong can you make your core? Like, those are the things with Elijah Page. But I think he's got very high upside at left tackle. I think he absolutely has left tackle traits, no doubt about it.
When we were breaking down his film, one thing that you and I both kept mentioning was, man, this kid's coached really well. Like, I don't know who their O-line coach is, but this kid's fundamentally sound already. To your point, it was about building up the body. It's going to be
very patient. Right. You can tell he's well coached, and you can tell he has confidence in his foot quickness, because that's why he's so patient of a player.
Right. That's going to do it for today's show, everybody. So thank you all so much for joining us. Obviously, the big news is that Joe Otting committed to Notre Dame. That is a really strong pickup. Fills a need at center. Gives them a kid that the staff did their homework on and felt this is a kid that was too good to pass up. That's how they felt. And we're going to find over the next 4 or 5 years if that's going to be the case. So lots going on. Make sure that you sign up for the message board. If you are a member of the message board, you do sign up. We are having some issues. There's some issues loading on the site. There's some issues with the speed. We are aware of it. We're working on it. The team is upstairs working on it right now. Angela's upstairs working on it with her team, because she runs her own business as well. So they have taken a break from all their other clients today to try to figure out what this problem is, and we hope to have it fixed in the next day or so. So I apologize for that. I would ask that you just be patient with us. I promise you that we're going to get it fixed as soon as possible, and it's going to come back better than ever. So everybody, Sid Irish says hit that like button. Please do so. And hit the subscribe button. Let's just pull it up here, Ryan, so people can see it. It's right here. Hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. And, of course, sign up for the message board. Check out the merch store. Built Bar, they got some really good products out. Obviously, if you use the Irish Breakdown promo code down below, you'll get 10% off, or I think it's a 10% off your entire purchase. You're going to check that out as well. And it helps me pay this guy over here. So keep him on staff and keep him employed and keep him happy. So we definitely appreciate that very, very much. But appreciate y'all being with us for 2 shows today. Have an awesome day. I'm going to predict now that we're going to have 2 more PM shows this week. So make sure you stay locked in for the latest. Have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you so much for joining the Irish Breakdown Podcast.